Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at setting up and working with our variable valve timing control with our Link G5 and G4X programming. Now, this tutorial, we're going to break down the setup and configuration and just some of the basic details of working in variable valve timing, kind of general terms. The next tutorial, we're going to be jumping in and taking a look at setting up variable valve timing on a Honda K24 engine and going through some of the basic calibrating and tuning process with the variable valve timing, seeing, using our mainline dyno, the difference by walking up the variable valve timing and then looking at how we can gauge if the variable valve timing change was a positive or a negative change. I'll describe some of that here in this training module, but we'll do an actual demonstration in the next tutorial. Let's jump in here and take a look at where we can find our variable valve timing control page, and then we're going to go through some, again, the basic setup and configuration details, get that out of the way here. So we're going to move from our basics page right now, and we're going to jump over to our page. If we scroll over here with our right arrow, go over to VVT. Now, as I'm doing this tutorial here, this VVT page is only applicable for a engine with VVT control on the intake cam. If you have an engine that has VVT control on the exhaust cam as well, we would have to go in here and create a whole nother page layout dedicated for setting that up and calibrating and tuning it. Right now, I just have the single page. When you go and actually download the course and install this layout into your software, you should see that this page is going to be labeled VVT intake, and then I'll have another one, VVT exhaust. So that way we have those defined. And again, if you're working with something like a Subaru EJ25 engine with the dual AVCS, AVCS is what Subaru is going to call their VVT control. So it's going to be having variable valve timing on both intake cams and both exhaust cams. That is going to require us to have a separate page for the variable valve timing exhaust setup and control. How we set this up, how we configure it is going to be the same essentially as our intake, looking at our VVT setup here, but we'll have special tables and some settings that are for exhaust cam control that I want to have in a separate window. So what we'll cover here, most engines are just going to be variable valve timing on the intake only, but there are some exceptions. Again, Subaru has the AVCS on dual intake and exhaust. Ford Coyote engines have dual variable valve timing on intake and exhaust. So there's definitely some engines that have it on both, but a lot of engines just have it on the intake cam. Let's jump in here to the VVT setup and start to talk about turning some things on and some of the configuration settings here, just getting a feel for what to expect for any engine if it's variable valve timing equipped. Let's go up here to our cam control mode, and I'm going to go from off, and we can toggle on here, double click there. In our menu, we can see there's a lot of options here. Let's kind of open this menu up here. We're going to see that there's a ton of options, a ton of common engines that are predefined for the variable valve timing control. What this means is when you're selecting one of these common engines that you're probably going to be working with, it's going to be setting up a lot of the details for the PID gains, for the min and max clamps, for the integral, for the duty cycle range. It's going to be setting up a lot of those OEM specific details to control that specific pattern for the engine you're working with. So it simplifies the setup and control. Now, you could get into a situation where one of the engines you're working with is not found on the list. Then you'd have to jump down here to user defined, which gives you the ability to set up any engine with variable valve timing control. I haven't been in a situation that I've needed to use user defined yet. However, it's there, so we'll just briefly talk about that. Let's go and just pick a pattern here, a engine that is pretty common to work with. You might find yourself going in and configuring and tuning. I'm going to grab here a Honda K20 engine. It should be on our list here. I'm just trying to find our Honda option here. Here we go, Honda K20 VTC. Let's click OK. It's going to ask me, do you want to clear the VVT intake target table to all zeros and set the axes to default values? We'll say yes. These default tables are terrible, so we definitely want to change them. They're usually going to be configured set up on TPS main versus our engine speed. We absolutely want to change this, most cases, to manifold pressure, map pressure here, because we typically want to map our VVT movement based on manifold pressure and engine RPM. Sometimes we may want to do it based on throttle position, only if you're in alpha and strategy and you may not have an active or usable map sensor reading, but we'll change this up and we'll talk about how to configure this table more for the specific engine we're trying to control and tune. We'll get into it a little bit later in the tutorial. So the next thing we find here is, and we're going to skip over our cam angle test right now, but we'll talk about some of these other details. The next thing we have here is our startup lockout. This is set at 5 seconds. This is going to wait at least 5 seconds for the variable valve timing to function and to start to work. We want to wait at least 5 seconds so that we can get stabilized oil pressure. As oil pressure starts to move around, it's changing a bunch, that can affect the variable valve timing control. The way variable valve timing control is going to work, we're always going to have a variable valve timing solenoid that controls oil flow, which is going to go through the camshaft, typically your intake cam. In this case, we're talking about intake cam control. The intake cam is going to be hollow. It's going to push oil flow through the hollow intake cam into the cam gear that's mounted to the actual intake cam, and that's going to have a chamber that we can fill up with oil pressure and oil flow. As we fill that chamber up, that's going to allow the cam to rotate and to move. So how much we're filling the cam gear up with oil pressure is going to change how much movement we have in the cam. Now we measure the actual cam movement with a cam position sensor. So there's a sensor dedicated to your cam, intake cam in this case, and that's going to be measuring how much travel and movement the actual cam gear is rotating. This is a closed loop system, so we give it a desired target that we want it to rotate to, and then Link's going to do its job to try to get the duty cycle control to the solenoid. So the actual oil flow solenoid, the pressure control solenoid, that's going to be pulse width modulated driven for any VVT control. We're going to be varying the duty cycle 0 to 100% to vary the oil pressure and flow to the cam gear. So it's, again, a closed loop system. We give it a target. It looks at the actual position of the movement and then adjusts the duty cycle output, either increasing or decreasing the pressure and flow to the cam gear so it meets that target. So again, everything is oil pressure driven. So that's why we have our startup lockout set here at 5 seconds. 5 to 10 seconds is pretty normal here. Again, we want to wait till the oil pressure stabilizes a little bit after we fire off the engine for any VVT control to happen, because we don't want to be fighting against odd oil pressure. All right, so the next thing we have here is RPM lockout.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.